warm welcome to all the participants who are just joining today's event titled Building Peace Amidst Environmental Fragility, a dialogue on upscaling climate-sensitive peace-building measures in Somalia. Today's session is organized by Berco Foundation and the Working Group on Peace and Development, also called FLEE, and my co-facilitator, Janelle Galvanic, and I will guide you through the session today, and I will briefly hand over to Janelle so that she can quickly introduce herself to you.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, everybody, wherever you might be. My name is Janelle Galvanic. I'm the head of the Regional Peace Support Department at the Berco Foundation. We are a non-governmental nonprofit organization based in Berlin, Germany. And we support people in conflict in their efforts to achieve sustainable peace through conflict transformation. We've been working in Somalia since 2015, and I'm very excited to have people on the panel today that we've been working with for many, many years. And our engagement in Somalia focuses on supporting and empowering local peace builders in their efforts to address conflict and climate insecurity and support reconciliation in Hirshabelle and Galmudug states. So I'm very happy to be here today, and I'll turn back over to you, Svenja.
Thank you so much, Janelle. My name is Svenja Windisch, and I am the advisor for international processes at the Working Group on Peace and Development. PREENT is an association of and a network of governmental organizations, church development agencies, civil society networks, and political foundations based in Germany. And we work on the interface between peace building and development, state and civil society, as well as politics and practice, to strengthen policy making on peace building and prevention in Germany, but also on the international level. So before we start the session, a few words on the logistics. So please take note that this session is recorded, and by attending it, you kind of give your consent to the recording. We would also kindly ask you to mute your mics and switch on your cameras. Also feel free to send your name and organization in the chat so that we can get an idea who is in the room with us. It's lovely to see your faces and also know who is listening and interested in the topic as well. Our discussion today is supported by two interpreters who will translate from Somali to English and vice versa. Please click on the interpretation function on the navigation panel below if you want to access one of the two languages. And we also have support from our colleague from Berco Foundation, Tom Rees. He's facilitating the chat. And if you want to ask any questions in the course of the session, feel free to post them in the chat or send a message to Tom directly, and he will later on include that, or we will include it later on in the Q&A session. The topic of today's session is climate-sensitive peace building. Climate change and environmental challenges are deepening fragility in Somalia, creating obstacles not only for peace building, but also for sustainable development. Together, they are amplifying threats to human security, especially for many whose livelihoods depend on agriculture. This leads to a multiplied number of land disputes, and also is hastening displacement across the country. And especially also after a few years of drought, also the impact of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, the impact on global food systems has further deteriorated the situation in Somalia, as well as in many other countries. So addressing the aspects of fragility impacted by climate change and environmental degradation is an essential component of conflict prevention and peace building, and requires inclusive decision-making, complementary action, and also cooperation across different levels and sectors. Recent reviews of peace building and climate adaptation alike have also shown that there's a need for local solutions. So making sure that activities are designed and implemented by local stakeholders is a crucial step to also ensure that actions are conflict sensitive when operating in fragile environments. But the question of scale is a key challenge when we are facing national and global phenomena like climate change and environmental degradation. So in today's event, we bring together actors across different policy levels to discuss lessons learned from their ongoing work, the transformative potential of climate adaptation and the ways in which locally designed measures can be upscaled. So I'm very happy that we have at least two of our three speakers right now with us in the room. They are experts from Somalia and working in Somalia. A warm welcome to Somalia, Ibrahim Osman. You are a member of the Insider Peacebuilders Network, also called IPN, based in Balad district in Hirshabelle state in Somalia since 2018. And you have actively participated in various peace initiatives in Hirshabelle state. You advocate for peaceful resolution of conflicts in an inclusive manner and are currently completing your bachelor degree in public administration from the University of Somalia. So welcome to the session. We are very happy that you could join us today. Thank you also to Daniel Norfolk for joining us today. You have been the program manager of IOM Somalia's Community Stabilization Unit since 2018. The program comprises a diverse portfolio of projects designed to address the drivers of conflict in Somalia with holistic interventions that foreground natural resource management and environment. And prior to IOM, you managed USAID's flagship stabilization program in South Sudan's Upper Nile region. You also have a PhD in political sociology from the Graduate Institute in Geneva. And we very much hope that our third speaker will be able to join us also in the course of this session. He informed us that he is facing logistical challenges or difficulties, but is trying to join us as soon as possible. I would nonetheless like to introduce him already now. His name is Abdullahi Khalif. He is the principal advisor to the Somali Federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change and has over 20 years experience in governance, development, and policy advice, as well as a PhD in agricultural entomology and a diploma in management administration. His work and his publications focus mainly on food security, peace and development, and humanitarian aid. And it would be really great if he can join us later because he would add the state's perspective to the discussion today. So I'm very much looking forward to our discussion later on the two main questions that we would like to have as a basis for today's discussion. One is how can measures on national level increase the impact of climate sensitive peace building on the local level? And the other one would be how can climate sensitive peace building measures on the local level be upscaled? Like I said already before, we will also have a Q&A session at the end, and please feel free to post your questions in the chat. I know you can't mention it often enough. It would be really great if you could also share your questions with us so that it can be a bit more interactive. Very much looking forward to that. So before I hand over to Janelle for the second part of the discussion, we have planned short inputs by our speakers, showcasing their different perspectives on building peace amidst environmental fragility, their challenges, and also the solutions they're implementing already. I would like to start with Sumaya. She will probably speak in Somali, so now would be a good time to switch on the interpretation function. Sumaya, you have participated in various peace initiatives in Hirshabelle state on a community level. How has climate change affected the livelihoods of people in your community? And how are they adapting or maybe even not adapting to this new reality? If they adapt, is this adaptation always positive also? Maybe you could share a little bit your perspective on this.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I want to answer the two questions combined, if possible. If I answer the first question, climate change has severely impacted the Somali people's livelihood because there were so many recurrent droughts and also floods and also unpredictable climate. So many people lives were lost in the last 6 years. there was long droughts that happened in most of the country, especially affecting the people, livestock and agriculture. Most of the people's life is depends on the livestock and agriculture, and these have brought food security and displacement and people fleeing and from place. The climate change impact it brought so many social and economic problems. It also increased poverty. It also caused so many conflicts also. In that regard, the droughts and the flooding that happened that has caused so many destruction of properties, special and also livestock, and this has caused food shortage, poverty, and also malnutrition. So climate change has also impacted, and people has been, there were so many conflicts in the ownership of land. People fought over scarce resource. People also compete over scarce resource, and this has caused so many conflicts, which has also led to displacement in Somalia. So climate change is a part also impacted people health wise. So there was cholera, there was also malaria that also impacted the already fragile health situation in Somalia. In Somalia, climate change is very obvious. Somali people, people who lived in the agriculture, when they had this kind of problems, especially when there are floodings or droughts, they move to another place. They go to the villages and they go to the other places. When people flee from those places and they go to other places, there is those who are fleeing. They sometimes face rape, especially women, when they go to the other places and they go to a place which are not secure, and they build a house which are from makeshift things. Sometimes there are also organizations coming to them, and when they are waiting for when they are waiting for food, they sometimes have been asked to get. They were also sometimes been asked they were going to be given food, and these kinds of rush food handouts, 50% is given to other people. So most of the food aid is given to the government or the local administration. So people who are affected by the droughts or the flooding, they don't get the full assistance, because most of the aid ration or handouts are given to the government or local administration. So even the human rights, even these humanitarian agencies, they don't receive real food from that. So that's why there are sort of intermediary between the people. So people in need who are being affected by the climate change. So this this also causes misunderstanding between the local government and the people who are in need, and also the agency, they lose trust, and that's the problem why there is the second question about the adaptation and of the Somali community, and there is no much adaptation, because in Somalia, people are not ready, because people are not coping. There are no strategies. Every time there are droughts, there are twice a year there are droughts or flooding, and if Somali people or the community were ready and for the flooding, if there are no if there were reactive strategies, they only wait for the handouts, and that's the reason. So I would say that the people are not quite ready. They are not adapting to find strategies to face these kind of recurrent droughts or flooding, especially from the climate change. And Somali government is also not ready as a government to help those people and alleviate the problem. Somalis have not the resources or the necessary resources so that they can help the people in need. I cannot say the Somali people also, Somali government cannot say also they cannot even tell the forecast, and they cannot give them real information about whether there is a drought going to happen or whether there is flooding that's going to happen. In this case, so people are not quite ready, and for the climate change, there are no projects for the farmers to help them out. There are also there are not programs to help them, the livestock owners. Somali, they don't have also food reservoir, or there are no dams where they can also save during the droughts. They cannot predict that there is going to be so that people can get ready for those things. So this one, and there are no readiness from both the community and from the government. There is no, because we lack the resources needed for this. As you may know, the revenues for Somalia would have been most of the climate change impact happens the revenues, especially in the remote areas where government do not have access to, and even aid organization have not access to. Even the government, they sometimes they don't. Even the climate change information they hear from other organizations, and this kind of information do not reach the people, the local community, and if it reaches very late. And that's my question. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Somalia, for drawing also a picture of the situation in Somalia, and also I think you mentioned already one approach and one solution that you're providing, that is awareness raising, if I understood correctly, raising awareness about the interdependencies and the nexus of climate change and also peace building. I'm happy now to move on to Daniel, and being at an international peace conference, the international perspective should also not be missing, and hence I would like to give the floor to you. Your work on, I'm sorry. Sumaya.
She said, I want to add.
Please go ahead. Maybe just a very brief.
Also, there were research we did in the coastal, especially Adala region, when we went there, especially for climate change. It's not being. It does not cause only to people and to the life farm. It also, we went to the Adala coastal region 1 month ago, and we did a research. We met with schools. There are no schools in those places because the high school there and in the Adalet, because that was flooded by so there were also health centers or schools where people, this has been also flooded by the, so it's climate change does not only affect the people's livelihood, it also destroys education, and Somali people are not aware of this, and they are not aware that this has been caused by climate change.
Thank you for this additional comment. I will move on to Daniel now. You are working on drivers of conflict and implementing holistic interventions that foreground natural resource management and environment. In your work, how do you assess the localized needs with regards to climate change and peace building, and how do you try to manage the complexity, especially when it comes to harnessing local communities' agency for climate-sensitive peace building?
Thanks. I hope everyone can hear me. Thanks for having me. Like Sumaya, I think I'll try to take both questions at once, or at least in succession. And as Sumaya had mentioned, I mean, there's just so many dimensions to this subject, to this phenomenon or interlinked phenomena. But there are a growing number of sources that enable better triangulation, and I do think early warning systems will get better. But to be honest, it's a real challenge. And I think there's two reasons that stand out to me that probably warrant further interrogation for why it's such a challenge. One is that nature-based solutions to conflict or better natural resource management between communities, for example, should not be equated with environmentally sustainable resource management or nature-based solutions. They're not the same thing. And the second thing is that micro-adaptive behavior and macro-adaptive behavior often work at cross purposes, or one type of positive adaptive behavior at one level can actually lead to maladaptive behavior at another level. And I'll try to cash this out with an anecdote from our work. Between 2019 and 2021, more or less, the government of Somalia recovered large swaths of territory in Lower Shabelle, which is historically the sort of fertile breadbasket of Somalia along the Shabelle River. And so once Al-Shabaab was moved away from much of the sort of villages, they're still very active in the rural areas. A lot of the earlier grievances sort of came to light and around property and around natural resource management. And there's also been a lot of self-segregation. So groups don't necessarily live near one another over the course of multiple conflict, displacement, flooding, and everything. And so one of the routes we figured sort of in Somalia where like the two main resources, water and livestock, are both movable assets. They move between communities, regardless of whether those communities have become further segmented. We should be able to latch onto that and sort of work with that to try and develop some better natural resource management practices that create broader interdependence and mutual benefits. And so we started working with two communities, the Biamal and the Habrigadier communities, and 2 villages, and then moved to 3 and 4 and 5, and it was successful working on canal rehabilitation and improved farming techniques in these areas. And that seemed to us to be sort of a move in the right direction. And until we took a step back and looked at what actually was going on in sort of a larger scale, or sort of taking it, a sort of bigger picture. And by improving the agricultural value chains throughout this area, it wasn't just canals, but roads and other bits of infrastructure that help goods get to market and help communities improve their yields. We were also contributing to the growth or the regrowth or the benefit. I guess the people benefiting most were large landowners along the river that have historically exported bananas and monocrop bananas. And so this realization prompted us to look a bit closer at what that means for the small holders that are sort of downstream from the river and the canal networks. And monocropping bananas is highly intensive water consumption. The water consumption that's already scarce is massive, and then which also leads to soil erosion. The monocropping of bananas leads to soil erosion that then impacts much heavier the communities that are downstream between the river and the coast. And so this was sort of the moment in time when we realized that the best intentions can contribute to larger scale maladaptive behavior that actually has, in the medium term, not even the long term, a considerably negative effect both on the climate and on the populations. And so I know it's probably coming to the end of my time here, but I just wanted to give that anecdote to demonstrate how challenging, even if you think you've got the right bits of the puzzle in front of you after doing all of that triangulation, you can still be totally off unless you sort of continue going back and forth between the micro and the macro and continue sort of testing your assumptions about what better natural resource management actually means in the bigger picture.
Thank you so much, Daniel. At this moment, we are mainly collecting the different perspectives. We will try to connect them in the second part of the session. I think we can welcome Abdullahi Khalid. He just joined. He's our third speaker. Abdullahi, if you can switch on your camera, that would be amazing as well. I have already introduced you in the beginning, so we will dive right in. You are the principal advisor to the Somali Federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and thus you know the perspective of the Somali state, very well. We're seeing the first round of inputs right now, and I would like to ask you, what challenges does the Somali government have in responding to the effects of climate change and in implementing relevant policies? How is it addressing them, and how is it working with international and local level actors to acquire the resources and capacities to mitigate the climate crisis?
Thank you very much, Sonia. And apologies for the time slots, because it is really important to understand when we have such kind of events. It is so important to think about the different time zones and the different obligations that we have. Before I go to the government and what the government is doing to enable this response is, I think climate change impact is very, very visible and prudent in Somalia. The government has, I can't say the government is doing much, because in Somalia, the role of governments are actually, different roles of the government are actually done by the international community, whether it is UN, whether it is the international NGOs, and whether it is name it. So the government of Somalia is actually not yet enabled to do what it's supposed to do. One example which I could say today is, if you look at, for example, the climate financing procedures, Somalia is not even eligible yet, or it is not ready, as they say, to access the climate financing, because Somalia is actually working on the readiness project is to access the climate financing. However, the Somali government has put in place several policies which enable appropriate response and appropriate interventions to be done. One of them is, for example, this Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, which I advise, is actually just like 7-8 months old. The Somalia did not even have a Ministry of Environment and Climate Change before. It was a directorate. So we had already worked on several acts which is enabling the government and the ministry to actually focus on responding this climate change impact. For example, about a month ago, the ministry tabled on an environmental management bill, which has been approved by the parliament, and now it is at the Senate level, which we are hoping to be approved. There are several policies, including water policy, including the private investment policy, and all those kind of policies are actually in place, and they are in the parliament to be transformed into acts. So the government of Somalia is in the right direction when it comes into policies and acts to respond to this climate change impact. On the other side, the government is really working, and I can say through my experience of what I know now, we are actually engaging to our development partners, and we are guiding them, their interventions and their program to be actually reflecting the true need of the country, whether it is thematic and whether it is geographic locations. So we are guiding actually the development partners on the best way to intervene on these things. Several initiatives are already in place. For example, the first CHEF 7 climate green what is GEF, Global Environmental Facility, actually had been approved, and the government is actually directing on the thematic implementation and the geographic location to focus on. And I know World Bank is also doing a lot of support when it comes into the food security and the climate change impact or resilience building for the government. But what I can authoritatively say is to date, actually the impact of these programmings are not yet being seen. But we are in the right trajectory, and we are hoping if this positive engagement with the international community and the development partners continue, then we can say in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, Somalia will actually be seeing the impact of the interventions. To conclude, I personally, I am working now on the review of the country's NDC plan, nationally determined contributions, and we are now reviewing the commitment that the Somalia government made. And also we are planning to develop the 10-year NDC implementation plan, which will focus on the mitigation and adaptation priorities for the country. And I think that will be in place by end of August or September, where we will actually inform and lead the development partners to really focus on these priorities, which the government are actually coming up. And it is not only us who are coming up, we are also engaging partners who had been actually supporting Somalia for the last 30 years to be part of our initiatives. I think I will stop here when I wait the second or third questions. Over to you, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Abdullahi. I think this gave quite a complete picture now, having these 3 inputs, and it shows already that the efforts or the joint efforts in Somalia should be around developing or strengthening the coping mechanisms and adaptation strategies. And I think now in the second part, I will hand over to Janelle. It will be very interesting to hear and discuss with you what the possibilities for cooperations are between the actors on different policy levels as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Fenya. Thank you so much. And thanks again for everybody for joining us today. I hope you can all hear me well. We're going to jump right into the second part of the discussion, because one of the ideas of this event is to listen to ideas of how to bring these levels together. So how can government work together with local level actors? How can the local level work with international actors? Because obviously the issue of climate change and environmental degradation is very, very complex in Somalia as elsewhere, and it does necessitate a multi-level and multidisciplinary effort to come together to tackle these things. So we want to hear a little bit more about how, for instance, local perspectives can be integrated into this. And I'd like to turn to Sumaya first. We'll, since Abdullahi just spoke, we'll turn to Sumaya first, and then I'll come right back to you, Abdullahi, afterwards. So Sumaya, for you as a local peace builder in Balad, you work very often on these topics. How can local peace builders and the government cooperate better on climate-sensitive peace building? Sumaya. Sumaya, can you hear us?
Could you repeat the question, because the voice was cutting? Could you repeat the question, Janelle?
Yes, no problem. The question is, how can local peace builders and the government cooperate better together, specifically on climate-sensitive peace building? Is she still with us?
I think she is. We will see when she. I will translate when she talks. Yes. She is still requesting the question to be repeated.
The question is simply about how the local peace builders, like herself, Sumaya, how can they work better with the government on issues of climate insecurity?
At the moment, when talking about the government, the cooperation between the government and the youth like me, we don't work directly. There is no direct cooperation between us because of the center when it comes to peace building and climate change. Because there should, what we do, we started nowadays, but there is a sort of a cooperation because we started training the police, and from there, their places, and we also gained their trust nowadays. And previously there was no, because of our activities on the local community, there seems to be the government is no trust in us, and especially specifically when we were trained by Berger Foundation, especially IBN, the local peacebuilders. And when they saw our efforts on the ground, the government started working with us directly, and that they found that we are trustworthy and that our efforts is worth entrusting. So that because they know that the peace should be done from within. There is a good cooperation between us, between the government and local government and the local community. And so we are expecting more to be done.
Thank you, Samaya. Thank you very much. I think that actually says a lot when you talk about the youth not necessarily having the trust of the government initially. It takes some time to build these relationships and for the government to understand that the youth are really motivated for peace and for tackling the complex issues of climate change and environmental degradation. Abdullahi, a question for you about this integration of these levels. How can natural resources, from your perspective and from the perspective of as you mentioned, the very young Ministry of Environment, how can natural resources be peacefully and sustainably and inclusively managed in such a conflict-affected context such as Somalia? And specifically, what are the challenges with trying to manage these natural resources sustainably and peacefully? Abdullah, please.
I will start with the challenge. The challenge is Somalia had been without government or without a stronger government less than 30 years almost. Now, for those for more than 30 years, Somalia has lost its own conflict resolution system. Reason is the international community's intervention to Somalia when it comes into conflict resolution. Because Somalia is one country which had its own conflict resolution mechanism, the local hair system, all those things. But when the government collapsed and the system collapsed, all the orientation systems, all the inclusive systems, all the conflict reconciliation systems were foreign and alien. And that really affected hugely to Somalia's conflict resolution system. So when it comes into the natural resource sharing, Somalis had their own natural resource system. They had their own gas system. They had their own communal land grazing and communal ownership system. But when the response usually comes, people usually are being really divided into deep-rooted clan systems. And I don't blame anybody here, but when the system collapsed, that is exactly what, because people had to benefit on certain things. Somalia had been, the minority and social disintegration were introduced within the Somali, the 30-year system. I know before the collapse, there was also some sort of social injustice, but at community level, people used to live together. putting aside that challenge. Now, when it comes into, there is very live examples which is happening today in Somalia, because if you look at climate mobility is big thing in Somalia, and the climate refugees is big thing in Somalia. And then there are a lot of IDBs within the country. But what I have noticed in Somalia and the people are now doing is like the host community and the IDBs are actually sharing the available resources of where the IDBs came in. So what could be done to do better integration within the host community and the climate refugees or climate IDBs is actually to create enabling environment and coexistence between these communities, which exist at some point, but when it comes into the resource sharing level, it's actually very minimal. And that is where the conflict comes in when it comes into the resource sharing, because some people may believe some people invaded their territories, yet there is no enough resources to share. So I think community of practice, community coexistence, and the creating equal opportunity for the host community and the IDBs and the climate refugees is usually what it needs to be done. And it is happening at some point today in Somalia, because if you look at where the climate mobility mainly affected in Somalia, particularly between the two rivers and the riverine communities, people are actually moving from one community to another community and living together and sharing programs, sharing even agricultural lands. So what we only need is to strengthen that community coexistence and the community of practice and the creating, enabling programs and environment to live together, where the government of Somalia at federal member state level and the federal government are actually really trying to work hard, but one limiting factor today is the resource availability for the federal member states, which actually affects creating this coexistence between the communities. But culturally, Somalia has that culture of living together. What only affects them today is the limited resources, and that is what the conflict is based on at some point. But if we create an enabling environment and effective localization agenda could also help this, because what happens in Somalia is majority of the people who do the intervention lack the context of Somalia and the specific areas context. So when we speak, I have a background of 20 years of international staff and the local staff, either in UN or early warning system or academia. So what we are really, I wanted to see for the rest of my life is that localization agenda and the engaging mutually to the local institutions to focus on this natural resource conflict-based or interventions is actually the way to go. And if somebody today is actually advocating or lobbying how to tackle this conflict, a natural resource-based conflict, is to sit back, check about the Somali's conflict resolution system, and embrace the localization agenda. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you very, very much, Abdullah. Very, very interesting information in there also about what really we can do going forward. Thank you very much for that. I do want to mention briefly a comment from Sarah from CCCPA in the chat, where she completely agrees with you, saying that national capacities to adopt a climate lens in national policy is really a crucial step to deliver nationally owned climate responses that sustain peace. And they are doing this with the CRISP initiative, so it's worth checking out the chat to have a look at that. She gives a link to it. But thank you very much for your insights and input. Daniel, I'd like to turn over to you for the last question of this round, to ask you, how can cooperation on climate sensitive peace building positively contribute to conflict and resolution and prevention on a larger scale? So how do we make this bigger? Thanks, Daniel, over to you.
Thanks again, and I really appreciate this discussion. I mean, I think what everyone has said is absolutely right. There's nothing that I, as an outsider, can say that's going to be more appropriate to the local context than Abdullahi and Somalia. I mean, like a government-led, effective and coherent localization agenda, I think is definitely what's needed. Without a government leadership, everyone has a sort of incentive to defect rather than collaborate on natural resources, and I think this becomes abundantly clear whenever you take any of the examples. Now, one area I think would be really interesting to explore deeper, and this is not anything new, I don't think. But okay, there's some crazy statistics. Like one I read the other day, I wrote it down. Between 2000 and 2017, the World Bank estimates 1 out of every 15 trees cut down in Africa were cut down in Somalia. So deforestation, soil erosion, and desertification are incredibly large problems when it comes to the climate. And on the conflict side, what we see so often are eruptions of violence between pastoralist, semi-nomadic communities over grazing land that's become ever more scarce. But if you take those things together, there's this sort of growing recognition that holistic rangeland management and livestock practices combined with regenerative agricultural practices can really regenerate the grasslands. I mean, like this is something that I don't think is now without evidence globally. But when you try to sort of lift up the hood, at least for me, again, like as an outsider looking at some of the issues around conflict over grazing land and over water sources, you run into some things that seem like Abdullahi said, that are sort of counterintuitive. You see a lot of actual sharing. It's not that scarcity leads directly to conflict. You see a lot of collaboration on the local level that seems as though it could be scaled up. And I think that's one of the main areas where local efforts could be linked up with sort of a broader government agenda to regenerate the grasslands and the rangelands in Somalia. I think that would be a good start. Another area that seems to have a lot of potential would be, I mean, the floodplains. Again, I think regenerative agricultural practices and the capture of groundwater, it doesn't need to just flood and be sort of death and destruction every season. This water can be used and reused and harvested, right? I mean, I think that there are, and this happens along huge areas of land. Now, there are other small tweaks. I mean, I think that we could look at interesting things from the past, and this is where again, I don't think anyone is really an expert, but I often you'll hear anecdotes, and we talk to sort of elders who have a recollection of a system of land management that was managed by the government during the Barre years. You know, sort of in a more sort of socialist system where, unlike other countries in East Africa, which privatized in large scale, Somalia did have a long history of government ownership that was recognized by the people. Now, I don't know how good that functioned or how well that functioned, and I don't know whether there are elements of it that still resonate, but there is institutional memory alive today of regulated land management. And so I think it's not just, when I say sort of holistic livestock management and rangeland management, it's not without very recent historical precedent. And that would be a scaled up approach, I think, that involves both local efforts and government stewardship.
Thanks, Daniel. Really interesting ideas about the regeneration and how we can harness this as Abdullahi also pointed out, this sharing that's actually happening. There's a lot of very positive things that are happening in terms of people coming together and helping each other when the situation becomes dire. And it's how do we harness this and upscale this? I would like to turn now to the people listening, the participants today. We have a Mentimeter poll ready for you. Tom is going to put it up on the screen, and if you can get out your phones or your laptops and go to www.menti.com. It's at the top of your screen. And as soon as that pops up, you want to put in a code 8838-3179. And that will bring you to the question. And the question is, what capacities and knowledge are needed in addressing interrelated peace and climate issues? So what do you think? And you can write one, I think you can write more than one idea. You can write a word or a phrase. What do you think the capacities are and the knowledge that are needed in order to address these very complex and interrelated issues? If once you enter that in, we will be able to see as it comes up, if I'm not mistaken, Tom. So I hope everybody's, I think there's 13 people already entering it. So please go ahead and add your idea for what is the most important thing that we need, what important capacity or what type of knowledge is needed to address these issues. And then, and here we come, a holistic evaluation, very, very good. Learning approach, so we don't do everything right away. We have to learn from what we're doing. Adaptive programming. This sounds very in line with what Friant and Berghoff and IOM are always speaking about. We'll wait for some other ideas. Data collection and analysis. Young people leadership, great. I think that speaks very well to having Sumaya on the panel today. Knowledge sharing. Risk tolerant capital, very interesting. Alternative livelihoods, and that is something that IOM is very, very active in Somalia. Did I miss anything? I don't think that, I think the size, you can see that the size of everything here, they're all the same sizes, which means that nothing has been said twice. So everything has been said exactly one time. Innovative risk-taking, a coordinated approach. Thank you very much to whoever wrote that. A coordinated approach is very, very important. Local context, so understanding and acknowledging the local context. I think it would be great to keep this slide for our work going forward in Somalia, because these are really, really important issues, things that are definitely needed to address these. And what I missed, roles, preconditions, okay. Mediation of grievances, absolutely. And I think probably everybody has entered by now. I'm not sure. If you haven't, we'll give you just another minute. But this is really interesting because it shows that there's not one main capacity or one main type of knowledge that is needed in addressing this. It is very complex. So the answers to this question are already as complex as the topic itself. There's something else I missed. Sustained funding. Okay, that one's a bit bigger. So I would agree with that. I think speaking from experience, this is a type of programming that is very, very long-term. And people, you know, practitioners and people on the local level and donors need to understand that this is a long-term process. This is not something that can be taken care of very quickly. It does need sustained funding. Great. Climate finance, I think is the new one. Flexible funding. Yes, definitely. Iterative activities. Thank you for that. Great. We will, I think we can probably make this available to the participants afterwards, this slide. So thank you very much for that. I think that is really interesting. And I would now like to turn to the last discussion round. We'll have I do believe one question that I will address to all speakers, and that everybody will have a chance to answer this, and then we'll go to the question and answer session. So if you do have a burning question that you would like one or other of the panelists to answer, please go ahead and put it in the chat, and I will read it out loud. We probably will not be able to choose all questions, but please, if you have anything to ask, that would be great. So Abdullahi, I'll turn to you first. It's the same question that I'm going to ask all of our speakers. And the question is, what measures can be put in place so that successful initiatives on the local level can be sustainably supported by the government and implemented on a wider scale? So what measures can be put in place to take these successful initiatives from the local level and put them into place? Please, Abdullahi.
Thank you. I think I said this several times in several forums. I don't only talk about the partners, but I always talk also to the government approach. And one very important thing is transparency and accountability of all sides. So the government institutions, because I'm just with the government for about 5-6 months. Before that, I was in this other side of the table. And what I always say is transparency and accountability. When I went into the government side, what I hear most from the development partners, and I used to say too, is like the government does not have a system that when it comes into public financial transparency and the public financial services are not adequate. And that is what I am now prioritizing even in our ministry. I am asking every government institution to have an appropriate procurement and of financial systems so that partners and the donors can trust the government. On the other side, the donors and the development partners, there are always unnecessary stringent measures which they always put in place when it comes into programming. So those stringent measures, which is not really necessary, should also be relieved or relaxed and to enable a mutual partnership with the local context. So I would only say if those stringent measures are looked at and if the transparency and the accountability of the side, the government side is actually being improved, then there will be a real partnership and a real and mutual collaboration and coordination. The other thing is, it is very interesting when you look at the development partners and the government, you can see 101 projects and the programs which are focusing on the same thing, yet they are not coordinated. So coordination is also one very, very important aspect when it comes into, if we really wanted to see a real impact on these programs. I can continue on and on and on, but I would say those three things are the most important issues for the government side and from the development partner side. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you very much. And I do think we could probably continue this conversation for many hours about what measures are needed and what can be done. Thank you very much for those very clear words. Daniel, I'll turn to you with the same question. What measures do you think can be put in place so that successful initiatives on the local level can be supported by the government and implemented on a wider scale?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I agree. There are a lot of things that could be said here, and I also agree with on both sides, transparency and accountability, but also that includes the international community, not just government and not just actors on the ground. I think we could do a lot more transparency, but the large scale, this has been mentioned a couple of times, and the large scale sort of long-term climate finance and climate funds are very difficult to access for the government and for partners, international partners. And I think there's a lot of people talking about this and how it needs to be become a bit more readily available. But in the absence of that, there are a lot of programs that are at least nominally, rhetorically devoted to some sort of climate, some sort of natural resource management, climate, or the environment. But I think, and we've talked about this before, Janelle, like, because it's kind of like a zeitgeist type thing, there's a lot of pressure to be innovative, to do something different. Really, people need to be doing the same thing. People need to be working towards consensus. People need to be looking at layering what they're doing and coordinating that layering, just like Abdullahi said. I mean, I think there are too many perverse incentives right now to do kind of like the new thing, when really that's not what's needed at all. Yes, experimentation for sure. Absolutely, but experimentation should be within these, and experimentation right now is not being built up. Successful experimentation is not being built upon in the ways that it should be, because people in this sort of meso layer, not this large scale climate finance, climate funding layer, are not getting together to coordinate and to layer their inputs right now. I think that's the case for Somalia for sure. Yeah, no, I think that there's a couple other things, but maybe turn to Somalia. If we have enter into discussion, we can speak a bit more about some of the ways that we could coordinate better.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. And I'm turning to Somalia with, again, the same question about what measures can we put in place so that the successful initiatives at the local level, for instance, in Balad, how they can be supported by the government and implemented on a larger scale. Somalia?
Thank you very much. The measures, the government should do their roles and visibility. When there is a government visibility, so government is not quite visible, and government youth must be given a voice in all projects, and also all their needs should be also mirrors in the policy, and people in the community should be also consulted, and there should be needs assessment, because lots of the projects are not based on their needs, and all the projects and policies should be and they should know what are the priority and what are the needs at the community level. What I was saying, there should be a participatory method for all, so that the project should be implemented.
Thank you very much, Somalia. I'm going to keep Somalia here, actually, because right now I'm going to go into the official question and answer session. We have a number of really, really good questions from the participants, and I want to turn to Somalia first with a question. And the question is, how can the international community support women and gender transformative approaches on the ground? So what can the international community do in that sense? And what does that look like in reality? Maybe give her a moment to think about that.
Thank you very much. The training, first of all, and capacity development. If women are given the opportunity and capacity, they will wait, especially capacity skills and knowledge-wise, and they should be empowered. When women are empowered, they won't be dependent on others. So when the women are educated, this means national education, so they can. When women are educated, that means a nation which has been educated. Capacity development is very important, and that's what could be done for us.
Thank you very much. That was very, very direct words, and something that I think hopefully the poser of the question can take away. I have a question for Abdullahi, and the question is, how can climate change adaptation financing support peaceful adaptation and actually peace building? And can the government advocate for this integrated perspective in fora like the COP? I'll repeat the question. It's about climate change adaptation financing and how this can support peace building. And can the government, the Somali government, advocate for this integrated perspective in forums like the COP? Over to you, Abdullahi.
Well, I'll start the government of Somalia. That's no doubt about it. We are actually preparing for that advocacy already. 30th of May to 16th of June, I will be attending the pre-COP meeting. There's what you call SB in Germany. And the reason why I am going for that, I and the minister and my colleagues are going there. No, the minister is not going, sorry. Why we are going is to start the advocacy on climate financing and adaptation and mitigation program. And why are we reviewing the NDC document and the NDC implementation plan is to come up a realistic plan that the Somalia can actually mitigate climate change and do the appropriate adaptation programming in the country. So for the government of Somalia is actually committed, and we are more than actually prepared to do that advocacy. Can you repeat for me the first part of the question? Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. I will repeat the question. How can climate change adaptation financing support peaceful adaptation and actually peace building?
Great. That is where, and also we are already partnered with global climate change mobility, and the Somalia had already become a champion country for climate mobility. Why we are doing that is to actually come up with the appropriate adaptation plan. And when we come up with that adaptation plan, what we wanted to do is to include all conflict sensitive programming in our adaptation program, all conflict resolution mechanism in our adaptation program. We are already establishing an climate change interministerial committee, which are combined of several ministries: Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Livestock, Fishery, the Blue Economy. And why we are doing all these things is to tackle the climate-induced conflict into our adaptation programs. So climate adaptation programs can really reduce conflict. Reason is, if we have a rural livelihood system which is sustainable, if we regenerate the rural livelihood system, if we introduce, and it is our plan to introduce, nature-based solutions. So we are actually focusing on a nature-based solutions. And when we introduce that, I think if the conflict was based on water points, and then we have a climate adaptation program focusing on a pastoral water system or livelihood water, rural livelihood water system, then we reduce the conflict, which is absolutely adaptation program is reducing the conflict. When we are creating, let's say, a forestation program, or let's say, the climate smart agriculture and the value chain programs, then we are creating income source for the youth, and we are reducing youth to come to the main centers and increase the insecurity. So we are also focusing on the youth issues, introducing vocational and skill knowledge system. And all these things, I am currently working on 5-year strategy for the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. And all these programs are actually being included in that strategy. So definitely, climate adaptation programs is the main weapon of ours to reduce the conflict, which induced by climate change. Over to you, Jenna.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent answer. And I'm going to throw this over to Daniel as well. I think you probably saw this coming because the question is about adaptation. And obviously IOM does quite a bit of climate change adaptation measures in Somalia. And so I would like to hear as well, Abdullah gave some really good examples of how financing for climate change adaptation can actually support peace building. So I'd like to throw that to you as well, Daniel, if you don't mind, I'm sure you have some insights on that as well.
Well, thanks again. I think there's a number of times over the years where we've been told like categorically, no, that won't work, whatever it might be. Not always to do with natural resource management, but sometimes with local governance or resource revenue. Let me switch my interpretation here. And when we've tried it with communities or with local authorities or with state level authorities, it's worked, whatever it might be. I could give examples, but and so the number of times that things are not tried because maybe they failed in the past, or maybe they haven't been done well in the past, or I don't know what all those reasons might be, but I think more works than we think. And one potential, a very simple thing that I think could be tried and should be, but it would need the support of the government. It would need some agreement between federal member states, so there'd have to be some horizontal agreement over, and also some sort of vertical integration between the district level and the state level. But I think the communities, together with the government, together with international partners, should pick an area and just throw everything they have at it for just to try, you know, convert the, like whatever humanitarian funds were allocated to that area, they can be kind of tweaked in a way or reoriented in a way to focus on the environment. We can have the funds coming in from the rural resilience programs, from the stabilization programs, from the the programs designed to enhance fiscal federalism. Like just bring it all to one place and just try it out, one region. And if there's success there, then you know what works and what. And I think that's one thing that we need to really sort of have a good go at. But of course, that involves compromise. The other thing is that I think there's a lot of really good, like lots of the most credible local informal institutions already revolve around natural resource management. And then you have lots of government efforts at sort of the federal level to develop natural resource management frameworks. And what was really needed is sort of systems integrator, because to get from that level at the state down to those local levels where they're already function in a way, there's no hook there. There's just, I think there's a gap between really well-intentioned and very technically astute guidance coming at the state level, and then what actually works on the ground level and how it works every day. And these are, as I said, credible institutions. These are legitimate institutions, perceived to be legitimate by the local communities. And so there, I think, is an opportunity that we're missing again in terms of governance and coordination. So a systems integrator, I think that's something key. But yeah, when it comes to like the other adaptation, I think the ability to experiment and the ability to try out those ideas that people tell you don't work is key, is critical.
Thanks, Daniel. We have a question for Abdullah from the chat room, and the question is, what can we as implementers or interveners understand or do better in our programming to produce the impact that you speak of? For instance, social cohesion, coexistence, resource sharing. In other words, where are we coming up short? What are we missing to maximize our impact?
Great question. And I think Sumaya has touched about this. What I always say is, if you do not plan with the end users, the local communities, your programs will not be successful. So know the context you are working on, include the people whom you are serving, their priorities in your programming. And before you design a program, come to the target area or target community you want to serve. And then when I was very junior and I was starting my humanitarian work, we had a very nice, and I loved it, a PRA approach. So participatory approach, we used to say, now we say the localization. So that is what you need to do. Where we are coming short is, a friend of mine whom we publish papers together, we always say the humanitarian and the development world is another industry by itself. And then when some people graduate, there are always new people who are actually coming to that college. So I think institutional memory is something very important if we want to add sustainable and wanted to contribute the sustainable development goals. So work with the communities, retain with the institutional memory, and then know the priorities of the communities you serve. I say that, Chanel, and as I said in the chat room, I think I am going for our last 5 times prayer time, which is Isha. So I will excuse myself.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. And that's a wonderful message to send at the end. Work with local communities. So we're nearing the end of our chat. We did get started 15 minutes late because of the interpretation difficulties. I would, however, like to, Daniel, you have one question in the chat, and I would like to give it to you. Perhaps you could answer it in a minute or two, and it's actually near and dear to my heart as well. And the question is, what suggestions do you have for peace builders to connect with development organizations and navigate the difficulties of cooperating across that development humanitarian peace nexus. And this is something that the Berkow Foundation has been struggling with as well. So maybe a few words from you, Daniel.
So when you say peace builders, do you mean like peace builders like Somalia on the local level, or do you mean like peace building agencies working in the space and then working together with the development organizations?
That is a very good question, and I'm not sure, but both. let's say both.
Well, I think we're naturally gravitating towards a place where after this extended and acute drought, and after governments have had to sort of re-examine how much funds they have to devote to certain things, and there's a realization that everything has to sort of come together a bit more, and it has to sort of we have to, it's a classic thing to say that those emergencies are no longer emergencies so much in Somalia. They're just sort of seasonal occurrences because it's just routine, right? There's things, the flooding and the drought is happening so frequently that I think the humanitarian response, that is the sort of knee-jerk reaction. I shouldn't say that. I'm not criticizing humanitarians. I'm just, but is where a ton of money goes, and it goes again and again and again to very similar things. And I think that needs to be redirected in a significant way to longer-term natural resource management that basically enables the communities to access resources on a seasonal way, despite these challenges. So I think there is an acceptance as well amongst the sort of humanitarian community that they can't be. You have this sort of emergency response, that an urgent response, a life-saving response is absolutely needed, and you can't be asked to always be thinking about the nexus. So I think it is up more to leave a core life-saving response and let the develop. And I'm not trying to be sacrilegious and say the nexus doesn't work, but then carve out a part of that massive humanitarian budget, put it together more with the development and the peace builders who are already sort of more naturally inclined to work together, I believe, looking at drivers of some of these conflicts rather than sort of looking at life-saving solutions or life-saving approaches, and really create that space for dynamic and longer-term thinking, rather than just coming back to the same problems over and over. And I know nothing I'm saying here is groundbreaking. Like, I know it, but yet I'm still saying it. So, I mean, something's got to give, right, at some point. So on a more localized level, I mean, I think what Abdullahi said is absolutely right. One of the things we focus as the community stabilization unit for IAM Somalia, we focus on a sort of hyper-local level, and not necessarily for the best reasons, historically, at least, because we were looking at villages as the sort of military takes them over from Al-Shabaab, and so, but this kind of history, or this backstory, provided us with an understanding or appreciation of how critical it is to understand what makes a community tick. And like I said before, most of the time in areas outside of these few urban centers that are admittedly growing at a rapid rate, but it's all around natural resources. It's all around natural resources, and so the institutions that are there provide an entry point already, and that's for development actors to immediately realize, like, if we want to facilitate or at least help to support a nascent authority structure in this area, that authority structure can't rely on some sort of ad hoc taxation and checkpoints. They're going to alienate the same population that they're trying to gain credibility from. But here we have this functioning. Okay, it's not like it's a thriving economy, but it's a functioning governance structure around natural resources. For me, there's an immediate linkage between how you then generate credible resources or mobilize credible resources at the state, the formal level, that then by virtue of its sort of role as the government, as an authority structure, it enables more and more collaboration amongst communities within that sort of area of governance. And I think there's something there where development and peace-building actors are naturally inclined to look at. And as long as it's around natural resources, you're going to start doing the job of, or putting, ideally, humanitarians out of business.
Thank you. Well, I think that should be the ultimate goal, right? For communities not to need that humanitarian help. So thank you for that, Daniel. I do think that that's a good wrap up from your side about your reflection on this cooperation between these levels. I would just like to say that whoever posed that question to Daniel about how peace builders connect with development actors, please send me an email. I have lots to say about that, but I'm not a panelist. So. And I would like to now turn over to Sumaya for the last word. I'm hearing somebody speak. I don't know who it is, but I'd like to turn over to Sumaya for the very last word. Sumaya, if you could just give your reflections, your takeaways regarding cooperation between the different levels. Where is cooperation required? How can it work? How can it support conflict resolution and prevention? And how can the international community support? If you could. We'll give you the last word.
Sumaya, Sumaya?
Yes. Yes. I can hear you now. I did not hear the question. Can you repeat the question?
I will repeat the question, sure. Sumaya, we're nearing the end of our event, and we'd like to give you the last word from Balad in Hirshabelle in Somalia. We would like to ask you just your takeaways on this cooperation between the different levels on climate sensitive peace building. So where is cooperation required, and how can it work, and how can the international community support?
There could be rooms for cooperation. There should be partnership, first of all, between the youth and the international government and the international organization, increasing the capacity building for the youth, awareness raising. Those who are working in peace and climate change should be also given a network, and also the voices of the youth should be taken in, or amplified, or taken into consideration. Whenever there is a cooperation, there will be a room for impact. The voice is cut from the source, I think.
Thank you, Sumaya. I think I'm going to run with that last statement, and that was whenever the voices of the youth are heard, that and they work together with the government, there can be impact. And I think that's what a great last thought to end our session on. Thank you so much to those of you who stuck with us this whole time. We did go over time. Thank you very, very much. Thanks to Svenja, the co-host from Preent. Very happy to have worked with you on this, and to Tom for all the organization. Thank you to our lovely interpreters in Djibouti, and of course to the panelists, Daniel, Sumaya, and Abdullahi. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. It was great, and I look forward to cooperating with you going forward. Have a wonderful afternoon or evening wherever you may be. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Alaikum salam.
Mahad Sanid, Sumaya.
Bye.